and welcome to the third lecture of Unit 4. In this lecture we're covering Chapter 6, Sections 1 and 2. What we're looking at is how the British tightened control over the American colonies after the French and Indian War, and then how the colonists react and resist that tightening of control. So we're looking at why the colonists and Britain began to grow apart, and a lot of it is because the English and King George are imposing a lot of new laws and taxes. One of the first ones that they pass is the Proclamation of 1763, right after the French and Indian War, which forbids settling beyond the Appalachian Mountains. And this is a big deal because we know that the area west of the Appalachian Mountains is the area that the colonists were fighting for and the British were fighting for, and now to say that you can't go out there, it's like we fought the war for nothing. All these people died for nothing, and that makes the colonists very angry. This was supposed to maintain peace between the colonies and the Native Americans, but it just angered the colonists. Next thing that King George does is he decides to keep 10,000 soldiers in America, but he didn't really think about the fact that it was going to be very expensive to house them. He didn't think that, I need to build a whole bunch of houses or forts or anything to keep them housed. So he instead asked Parliament to pass the Quartering Act, which requires colonists to house all troops. So you could just be sitting at home, minding your own business, a knock on the door, there's 5 soldiers there, they say, we're staying here, and they start moving in, they start taking out your stuff out of your room, and they're just going to sleep there, and they just start eating your food and all this kind of stuff. So it's very invasive. They aren't asking if they can stay, they're just staying. The Quartering Act, a good way to remember this is that your quarters are like your housing, like the captain's quarters on a ship. So it's kind of like the Housing Act. Like the Quartering Act is kind of like the Housing Act. The British also owed a lot of money due to the French and Indian War, so they needed to make some money. And how does the government make money? They increase taxes. So Parliament looked to the colonies to pay off that debt, so that means that they are going to pass taxes and acts over the colonies. The first one that we looked at is the Sugar Act, which it taxed sugar. The second one is the Stamp Act. It's not a tax on stamps, so don't just automatically assume that. It does have to do with stamps, though. The Stamp Act required that all legal and commercial documents carry an official stamp to show a tax had been paid. So you have a newspaper. Say you print a newspaper for a living. Well, before you just printed that newspaper and sold it and everything was fine, but now you have to pay money to get a stamp on the paper in order for it to be legal. And what that does is it makes it more expensive for you, but it also makes it more expensive for everybody that buys your newspaper. So this is going to make everybody mad because they have to spend more money. Another thing to think about, you have to think about who is passing these laws. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act. Who passes these laws? It's Parliament and the King. And do the colonists have any say over this? No. So not only do they have to pay more money, they didn't have any say in if they should pay more money or not. Britain believed that these taxes were fair. The colonists did not. Their anger focuses on 2 points, which is kind of what we just a little bit talked about. No tax should be created without the colonists' consent. That's, no tax should be passed without them having a say. The way that I would kind of look at it is, let's say, we've talked a lot about, we have a school-wide vote, and each room sends a representative up to the office, okay? They're going to vote yes or no. Now, let's say that the issue that we're going to vote on is whether or not there should be if there's going to be a 50-cent tax on lunches, okay? But what we have to figure out is who's going to pay that tax, 7th graders or 8th graders. Now, in a fair system here, all the classrooms, all 7th grade classrooms, all 8th grade classrooms would get to go up to the office, their representative would go up to the office and cast their vote for 7th or 8th grade. But what's happening here in this situation is it's like the 8th grade classrooms don't get to go vote. So only the 7th grade classrooms get to vote. And if the 7th grade classrooms are the only ones that are voting, those 7th grade classrooms are the only one, they're going to vote for themselves. They're going to vote in their interest. They're not going to worry about the 8th grade classrooms, so they're probably going to pass the tax to make the 8th grade classrooms pay. So in this situation, the 8th graders are like the colonists. They have to follow the laws about the taxes on lunch, but they don't get a vote. And the 7th graders would be like Parliament and the people living in England. They're passing the laws, they're voting, but they don't have to really, they're not voting in the best interest of everybody. They're just voting in the best interest of themselves. People began to say no taxation without representation. So in the situation that we just talked about, the 8th graders would say no lunch tax without us being able to vote. No taxation without representation. So some of the colonists start to form together and defy Parliament and fight against them in ways other than actually physically fighting. In 1765, people from 9 colonies formed the Stamp Act Congress. They wrote a petition to the king protesting the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act Congress was the first time that the colonies had unified against British authority. So it's the first time that they unite to oppose or go against something that the British government has put into place. Some other colonists form secret societies like the Sons of Liberty to protest the Stamp and Sugar Acts. They encouraged people to attack customs officials and burn the stamps, because they would do that because if there's no one to enforce the laws, the customs officials are the people that are collecting the taxes and putting the stamps on things and all that kind of stuff. If there's no one to enforce the laws, it's very hard for there to be a law. If you think about it, if there's a speed limit on the interstate, but there aren't any cops to pull you over, ever, and there's no chance that there's ever going to be a cop, that's, a situation where no one's going to follow the rules because there's no one to pull them over. So if customs officials are getting attacked, no one wants to be a customs official anymore, so there just aren't going to be any. That's the theory behind that. The most effective form of protest was a boycott, which was a widespread refusal to buy a certain good. What you have to think about, though, and why a boycott is so effective, is if we had a boycott in this country, or if we had a tax, let's say the government is going to pass a tax on McDonald's French fries. Now, what would we boycott to, get rid of that tax? We would boycott McDonald's French fries. But not only does that hurt the government by not getting the tax, it also hurts McDonald's because they're not getting any of the money from their French fries. So McDonald's is going to get kind of angry at the government for passing that tax because people aren't buying their stuff because of that tax. So in England at this time, the companies like, those big companies like in today's McDonald's, those big companies in England have a lot of say. They're going to go to the parliament, they're going to go to the government, and they're going to say, hey, get rid of these taxes because we want people to buy our stuff. We're not making any money. It's no good for us. So that kind of puts pressure on Parliament, and all of these things work, boycott and all that kind of stuff. And in 1766, the Stamp Act was ended, but Parliament passed the Declaratory Act, which stated that Parliament had supreme authority to govern the colonies. What that means is that we're going to let the colonies, England's going to let the colonies have their little local assemblies and vote on their laws and all that kind of stuff. But if they do something that we don't like, we're going to step in and we're going to take care of it. Or if we have a law that we want you to follow, you're going to listen to us. So it's kind of like your parents saying, every Friday you can go and you can see whatever movie you want. But if we don't like the movie that you choose, we're not going to let you go. And if we think there's a movie that you should go see, we're going to make you go see that movie. So it's not really like you have much of a choice. So the colonists are going to be pretty angry about that. The next thing we look at is why did colonists feel that Britain was interfering in its economic matters, and how did they protest it? The Declaratory Act, which we just talked about, stated Parliament had the final say in all cases whatsoever. However, this did not create any new taxes, and the British still need more money. So they have to come up with a way to make that money. Charles Townshend is a person living in England. He's going to propose a new series of taxes to Parliament. He says, we'll create the Townshend Acts, and it's going to tax imports like glass, tea, paper, and other things that come into the colonies. So now everything basically that comes into the colonies is more expensive. So the colonists, so who's passing these laws? Parliament and the king. Do the colonists have any say in it? No. Is that going to make them angry? Yes. Not only do they have to pay more money, they didn't even get to have a say in it. The Townshend Acts also allowed British officers to issue rights of assistance, or writs of assistance. These allowed them to enter a home at any time to search for smuggled goods. So at any moment, you could just be minding your own business, totally law-abiding citizen, nothing, you haven't done anything wrong, but people could knock on your door, start going through all your stuff, throwing everything everywhere, and just tear up your home and then leave and say, okay, well, you don't have anything. Now, that's invasion of, privacy, and, it's just a terrible thing, really, because it's a very big inconvenience, especially if you're not doing anything wrong. The colonists believe that such laws should only be passed by the local officials and not Parliament 3,000 miles away. That no taxation without representation. We want to be represented, and the best way to do that is by the people that are elected locally. The colonists organized another boycott in response to the Townshend Acts, and more people are getting involved in speaking out. It's not just little few groups of people. The Daughters of Liberty urge people to make their own clothes instead of buying them from Britain. So this is kind of another form of protest. We're not going to buy anything from Britain, we're just going to make our own. It's a good way to go about not giving Britain any more money. A lot of people were speaking out, and the British feared violence would erupt, so in order for that to happen, or in order to stop that, they send more troops to America, which makes the colonists even more and more angry. It's kind of like sending over babysitters to babysit the little kids over in America. In 1768, 1,000 troops arrived in Boston. Tensions rise, and violence kind of does erupt. On March 5th, 1770, a group of mostly youth and dock workers surround some soldiers in front of the State House. The crowd grew larger, and when the soldiers felt as if they were going to be attacked, they fired upon the crowd, and 5 people were killed. 5 colonists were killed. So put yourself in the soldiers' shoes. You're standing there, you're guarding the State House. 10 people show up and surround you and start yelling and screaming nasty things at you. And then 20 people show up. And then 40 people, and then there's 75, and then there's 100 people surrounding you, yelling, screaming. And all of a sudden somebody makes a strong movement towards you. And you're like, whoa, kind of get freaked out a little bit, and it looks like everybody's just going to start attacking you and beating you up and possibly killing you. So you kind of react to the situation. You fire, and you're trying to save yourself. Now, this is known as the Boston Massacre because the way the colonists see it is the troops have fired upon these innocent people that were just out there, but I mean, these people are yelling and screaming and causing a terrible scene for these soldiers. So, it's not as if the soldiers acted irrationally, but they did kill 5 people, and they killed 5 colonists, and that's going to make the colonists really, really angry, and really angry at those soldiers and at Britain in general. The soldiers are put on trial because John Adams, who is defending them, says that just because they're British soldiers and just because they killed colonists doesn't mean they don't deserve a fair trial. They still deserve to have a fair trial and be proven guilty and not just killed. And this shows that the colonists are thinking rationally. They're not just saying, okay, we're just going to kill all the British people. It says that we're going to, make sure that we go through the proper ways of doing this. If they, killed some of our people, we want to make sure that what the circumstances were. Adams say the soldiers acted in self-defense. The jury agrees, and the soldiers were released. In 1770, Parliament gets rid of the Townshend Acts, except for one part, a tea tax. And to get around this, the colonists just bought smuggled tea from England. So they're buying illegally smuggled in tea from Holland, and as a result, many of the British companies lost a lot of money. This, is bad for British companies. It's bad for Britain. They didn't lose money, and it's just hard for them to really keep these things around. So instead of getting rid of the tea tax, what they do is they put the Tea Act in place, which saves these British companies, and basically it tells people where they can and where they can't buy tea from and all this kind of stuff. And the colonists see it as another attempt to interfere with their economic life. And what they start to do is they see the importance of working together against these acts and forming protests together and organizing communication. So they form committees of correspondence to communicate back and forth with each other. And this is going to help increase communication, increase organization, and help form these protests against the British. One of these protests and things that is organized by some of these committees of correspondence is on December 16th, 1773, a group of men disguised as Native Americans boarded 3 tea ships in Boston Harbor. That night, the men destroyed 342 chests of tea, and this is known as the Boston Tea Party. British officials were outraged by this. They're saying, you guys are just throwing our personal property into the ocean, destroying our goods. You can't do this. It's not what you are supposed to do. So most of the time what would happen in the past is with the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act, the colonists would protest, British would get rid of it, and then they'd put something new in, and then they'd protest, and then get rid of it, and then they'd put something new in. But this time, the British officials are putting their foot down. Even though some colonial leaders offered to pay for the tea, if Parliament would just repeal the Tea Act, Britain says, no, we're not compromising on this. You guys have to follow the rules. You can't just get what you want. And this is what kind of pushes many Americans into open rebellion. So that is what we're looking at for Lecture 3 of Unit 4. Thanks for listening.